So like my marriage, for example, like marriage is like, it's just made up. It's totally made up. It's like, it's made up. And I could walk away from it at any moment.
I don't believe in God. Can I be Jewish? Is God essential to Jewish life?
What do I want? What do I want? Who am I and what do I want? As if the answer to that question will it give you a good life.
Welcome back to Really Jewish, our conversation about what it is to be really Jewish. If you're back for another listen, welcome back. If you're here for the first time, Bruchim Ha'Baim. This week we have one of our interview segments, our 10th episode, which we're really excited to bring to you. A Really Jewish project where we think about big topics shaping the Jewish world. And this is perhaps one of the biggest. We're talking about what is God? Is God a necessary feature in our Jewish tradition? I'm really excited to welcome Rabbi Joel Levy, one of my teachers for as many years as I can remember living and working in the Jewish community, ordained by Rabbi David Hartman and a rabbi at Kol Nefesh, one of our communities in London. We are alternating weeks where I talk to Yair Eldan, my co-host, who is secular. I am the religious rabbi of this podcast. But this year we're welcoming Rabbi Joel. So without further ado, let's listen to the interview. Okay, welcome to our guest, Rabbi Joel Levy. I said already offline, one of my favorite people, and also a teacher of mine over lots of years. Rosh Yeshiva at the Conservative Yeshiva. You also at the Futzberg Center. Oh, you also are a student of Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory and a rabbi in London simultaneously of Kol Nefesh Synagogue since 2001, immediately after you were ordained by the late, great David Hartman. And we studied together in the Conservative Yeshiva in the Bet Futzberg for about 3 years plus, some of my best years. And today we're talking on Really Jewish about what is God. Now, I can't think of a more Jewish topic, or maybe a less Jewish topic, than what is God. But it's really lovely to welcome you here, Joel. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. They were good
Let
years.
me kick...
I remember those years when you were at the yeshiva. There were a couple of really good years there.
It's lovely to welcome you. What is God, Joel?
Goodness me. You really want to start with that?
Let me start with a couple of words of introduction. The reason why I invited you on this topic is because, you know, we don't talk about God very much in the Jewish tradition, actually, on some level, although there's a lot of God language in especially in our Siddur, perhaps less so in our rabbi teachings and our rabbinic teachings in the Talmud and the Mishnah, but certainly mentions of God. Certainly mentions of God in our most crucial stories, including Yetziat Mitzrayim, Pesach just now 4 weeks ago, maybe slightly less, of when the Jews left Egypt. Lots of God language, but not necessarily lots of God discussion in our communities, and maybe even less so in our progressive communities, I don't know. When I was a young schnip rabbi student working my way out in the world, I think probably in passing, and maybe more than once, you said, kind of addressed an anecdote that you often have conversations with people about what is God, and you say, oh, tell me about the God that you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in that God either. And it's a great little kind of segment that I probably used quite often in my own rabbinic life, because it frames something of the simplicity of perhaps how some people understand God, and almost like a clumsiness with perhaps the way the average person or a person perhaps a little bit less thought out might think about God. And it also acknowledges maybe something of the complex journey towards understanding God. And I've definitely in my own journey had a very both complex relationship with God and also a kind of interestingly complex journey towards where I am today and how I might understand God. But this is not about me. This is also about why that image of tell me about the God that you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in that God either. And what is that God that you might encourage us towards as a teacher?
I think I'm going to try and avoid answering that question straight away. I think we'll get there, but I think that we have to go around the houses a little bit.
Great.
If that's all right. I'll give a little bit of a background as to why it is that the question is an unfair question, or it might even be the wrong question. Like, you know, you're allowed to ask whatever questions you want. You're in charge, mate. But the question is coming from a very analytical perspective. Look, people who've grown up in the West are very good at analysing things, and we're very good at ontology. We're very good at trying to work out what actually exists and what doesn't exist, and our brains we're just really into that. We're very, very critical and analytical. And so the kinds of questions that we tend to want to ask around God are those same kinds of questions. And you might end up backing yourself into a dark alley if that's where you begin with the God question. It would be a little bit like someone saying, as their first introduction to music, what is music? Which would be the wrong question. It would just be the wrong question. Because the first thing that happens with music is that you do it, or you experience it, or you sing it. And that is a universal, that is a ubiquitous human experience. Very few people come out of a great concert and their first question is, what is music? Tell me about what music is. And if they do, they're probably a bit mad, actually, because that is so much not the right question when you come out having been moved and shifted and touched and deepened by a concert. Like, the question is not intellectual. The first question you ask is not intellectual. What was that? And the reason why you don't ask that question is because humans are very, very good at music. They're really good at it. They're intuitively good at music, in the sense that, well, we've been doing it for a long time. Animals don't do music, really. There might be a few exceptions to that, but I think there are probably a few little, but that doesn't really matter. Like, animals, like, they do stuff in time with each other. Like, if you watch if you watch a group of birds moving in time with each other, they're tuned into each other instinctively. Some animals really in an amazing way. Animals can do that, but when humans do that, when we act in time with each other, in concert with each other, and create sound together, we have to actually learn how to do it. So anyone who wants to play in the orchestra, like, has to learn how to play the musical instrument. I'm one step ahead of the game. Let me just go piece by piece so I can do it really clearly. I'll lay it out, and I'll go back more clearly. So humans have been, as an American psychologist, Merlin Donald, he says humans have been doing music for about 1 million years. Like, that's something we've been able to do. He calls it mimetic culture. It's like humans have been able to create music together and dance together, and we were probably doing that for maybe 800,000 years before we started talking, even. Before language, 800,000 years before language, we were already dancing in a circle around the bonfire and acting in concert with each other and singing together and experiencing the tribe, and probably having transcendental experiences through music and through dance. And I would imagine that people were experiencing God in that context as well. Like, God in the sense of the thing that transcends me completely, and the spirit of the tribe, or the spirit of the sky, or the spirit of the hunt, or whatever it was that I encountered. I wouldn't have been able to call it that without language, but I have no doubt that humans have been having those experiences of something that transcends the self in a very perplexing and alarming and life-altering way for 1 million years. And we do that intuitively. We're just really good at that. I mean, we don't live in that world. Durkheim, the anthropologist of religion, emphasised that, no humans live within religious experience all the time. Most of the time we live in a very mundane experiences of getting up in the morning and cleaning our teeth and going to work and all that. We live within ourselves. And everyone lives within a mundane self most of the time. But no human lives within the mundane self all the time, because we can flip, something can flip in us, and we can go into a kind of a transcendental experience, a mystical experience, which transcends self. And I think what Merlin Donald said, which was amazing, is that happened a long time before we could describe what it was. And that's why no one in their right mind comes out of a concert and says, what is music? Because the right question isn't intellectual, the right question is experiential. So the starting question could have been something like, what does God feel like? You know what I mean? So even that is not really in tune with mimetic culture, because in mimetic culture, no one analysed it. You just did it. Like, if you're in there are no non-verbal human civilizations around now. But if you were in one, 500,000 years ago, you'd been having these experiences, and you'd know what you would taste God, and you would feel God, and it would be extremely important for you in terms of, one of the things about these kinds of experience that Durkheim describes is that they're not just things that happen on the odd occasion. They're like formative. You kind of live your life in the shadow of them. So like deep experiences of communitas, of being in community and transcending the self. If you lead your life well, those experiences are the ones that shape how you decide to lead your life. And they'll shape how you get up in the morning and how you do the mundane stuff as well. You'll sort of lead the rest of your life in light of those experiences. So that's the first stage of human evolution, according to Merlin Donald. And that's from the perspective of mimetic culture and the experience of God. The question that you opened with, like, what is God, is like, it's not even a twinkling in someone's mind. You don't even begin to ask that question because you haven't got language. You're not there.
But first of all, one clarification is that you live with a musician, I believe.
I do.
So that kind of, in some way or other, is an interesting just to observe for the person listening along.
No, it's also just that's relevant because I think when I started going out with Susanna, I think I might actually have been that person who said, "What is music?"
Right. Interesting.
I think I might have been that person. To which Susanna's response was, "Shut up, Dick." It was like, "What are you talking about? The wrong question." Like, it was like, what? That's the question. You just take.
You were trying to impress her,
right? But I was also super, like, I was doing a science degree, and I was super into like the Western analytical tradition, and I was trying to show off about how clever I was and all that kind of stuff. So, I was also, her family is very, very, they're like a Haredi musical family. They're like, right. Music is like their religion. So I was like a kind of completely naive person wandering into a world that wasn't my world, asking the wrong questions, like fumbling around. It's not that I hadn't heard music before, but I'd never encountered that sort of relationship with the musical tradition.
It's just interesting because I also feel the need to dignify the question, because many people who walk into a synagogue for the first time or walk into Jewish life come with that question. I often hear, as a rabbi, can I be part of this community if I don't believe in God? Whilst it might be, in your slightly judgy eyes, the wrong question, it is... We need to, I know we're going to get there, but we need to speak to the question because it's often the framing that people come with. My sense of that is that comes from probably two of the other three Abrahamic religions that, to a degree or another, and I'm nor Christian nor Muslim nor a scholar in either of those religions, but at least from my perception, come with an opening question of, do you believe?
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Jewish religion in history has come with that questioning, do you believe, or what is God? But there are exceptions to that in our exceptions to that in our tradition.
Yeah. So the next layer. Let me do it piece by piece. The second layer, according to Donald, the second layer of human evolution is what he calls mythic culture, which starts with the invention of, and this is the beginning of the use of language about 200,000 years ago, and runs through from. Well, we're still in some ways we're still in that world. But when we had language, the first question we asked wasn't like, do you believe in God? That is a very weird question. We started with stories. We started with myths. We started with tribal myths. We described reality as in, we could say to each other things like, be careful when you go down to the second turn in the river because I saw a tiger down there on Tuesday, which is a very useful thing to be able to say. But we could also say things like, we could also talk about what we ought to do. We very quickly started talking about a world which wasn't the world of tangible things in front of us, but a world of intangibles, thoughts, wants, gods, values. We spoke about those kinds of things as well. The tribe. What is the tribe? Like, what does it mean to be one of this, to be a member of this? What does it mean to experience that thing we experience when we dance together and to serve it properly? And so like we began to tell stories, and the stories involved the gods. I think that probably that happened very, very, very quickly. And rabbinic culture, biblical culture and rabbinic culture in some ways is actually a continuation of that. Like, I have to say something about the third stage of human evolution in order to know what it is that we're trying to avoid getting into. The third stage of human evolution, according to Merlin Donald, is what he calls theoretic culture, which begins about 5,000 years ago with the invention of writing, Mesopotamia. And writing isn't just the writing down of oral culture, it's an amazing change in human civilization, because That's when people start asking very, very theoretical questions. And when we start asking questions of ontology, what is God? Do I believe in God? And one of the interesting things about the rabbinic tradition, interestingly, is that, as you said quite correctly, like the rabbinic tradition, it bridges the oral and the written, and the Bible as well. The Bible is a document which starts with an oral culture and ends in written culture. 99% of the rabbinic tradition is not theoretical at all. It's just story after story after story with no systematic attempt. Like, it's amazing how no systematic attempt to understand what God is. God's like the main character all the way through everything, and no one is saying, well, what is this? In the vast majority of rabbinic literature, that question of theory, abstract questions, do you believe in this, so doesn't come up, doesn't even get asked in the Bible. It's just not in there. It's like who asked that question? What are you talking about? God is if you ask that question, if you said, do you believe in God, it will be a little bit in the Bible saying, do you believe in music? Someone will just look at you like you're loony. Like, do you believe in music, Oliver? Like, well, what's the answer to that? It's the wrong category. Like, the question of do you believe in God doesn't come up in the Bible because people are leading lives which are infused with the experience, both of the stories, but the encounter is like all over the place. Like, people are encountering it, experiencing it, living it. Why would you? It would be like, do I believe in my wife? Do I believe that she exists? Well, I don't know. I spend a lot of time talking to her, and we have, I don't know, it would be a kind of weird question to ask. Maybe I don't understand why you're asking the question. Is there something wrong with you?
So I want to do a definitional clarification for people who... You mentioned this oral and written, so
yeah.
I can do the descriptor, but the written you're describing in the broad sense is the Jewish canon. So all of the books of the Bible, including the most crucial first 5, which are the 5 books of Moses. And then we have the Psalms, and we have the Proverbs, and we have Jeremiah and Ezekiel and all sorts of other prophets and writings thrown in for good measure. And then we have the oral tradition, which is both the Midrash, which interprets the Bible, and the rabbinic codes, which are the Mishnah and the Talmud, which dip in and out of all of these discussions, but exactly as you described, don't categorically try to answer what the nature of God is, or if there is indeed a God, or maybe even if we need to believe in such a God. Is there something, my take on why the journey from the written tradition to from the oral tradition to the written tradition matter is exactly that, which is when you have an unwritten tradition, when the tradition is only in our own memories and learnt over time, there's just a great deal more fluidity of what the tradition is, and then it's close to impossible about nailing down or what the mitzvot are, the commandments are, or nailing down the nature of existence, or nailing down what the nature of God is. And everything is just a kind of more fluid mix of ideas rather than any kind of canonization or categorization of that material. Is that a fair estimation of why that...
It is. I would just add one thing to that, which is that we call the Bible the written tradition, Torah shebichtav, and we call the rabbinic tradition the oral tradition, Torah sheba'al peh. But of course, it's really the other way around, because the most ancient part of our tradition, the stories of the Chumash, the earliest stories, those stories predate writing. They definitely predate writing. There are other cultures where we can view the transition from oral to written tradition, like Greek culture as well, the writing down of the Iliad. So these begin as oral traditions, and they eventually get canonized and written down. In the Bible, that's definitely true. There's a process by which oral stories, which go back many, many, many thousands of years deep into pre-literate culture and had a huge fluidity around them, eventually become solidified into what we call the written Torah. But what you described is exactly right. At a certain point, Judaism decided to canonize those texts and to say that they're fixed. And that was the kind of jumping off point for, paradoxically, for enormous Jewish creativity, because once they decided the text was fixed, then the rabbinic interpretations of those sources, which we call the oral tradition, paradoxically, were enormously fluid and creative, and like the early rabbinic writings on the Bible are just it looks like people are just where are they getting this stuff from? This huge explosion of creativity in the early rabbinic period, where everything is fluid and the text means 1,000 different things, and that's a manifestation of its significance. And it's like, it's so postmodern in the sense that it's like the text is a source of infinite meaning. If God is infinite and his text is infinite, then there must be an infinite ways of reading the text, and therefore the text is all over the place. It's wonderful. Like this, it's like this huge outpouring, this Mayan Hamit Gaber, this kind of overflowing fountain of meaning pouring out of Torah that started in the early rabbinic period in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. What we call the oral tradition, paradoxically. And it's the reason, I think you're exactly right when you said, the reason why we call it the oral tradition is because its oral nature originally was not meant to be written down. The reason why it was not meant to be written down, because it was never meant to be canonized. It was always meant to be this kind of ferocious, fluid, changing tradition of interpretations of the Bible. And then because one of the kind of weird things that happened in Judaism is that we decided to canonize our oral traditions, canonize the Mishnah, canonize the Talmud. That was kind of a weird thing that we did. Like, that became canonical, and we wrote that down too, and that was fixed. Now things like the Mishnah's fixed now, and the Talmud's fixed. How the hell did that happen? That's like weird. How do we end up getting into that terrible situation of thinking? In early rabbinic sources, Talmud was a verb. It was a thing you did. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a book. It was like this crazy process of analysis and reading and creating and interpreting. And none of that stuff was analytical. There's no place in that tradition before you get to the medieval period. There's no place where anyone was asking the question, like, what is God? Your opening question doesn't appear in that tradition. Just doesn't appear. It's not part of the conversation. They were too busy, like, riotously experiencing the presence of God in different forms and interpreting these texts and living lives the way that they ought to be lived and trying to live with God's will, to ask weird abstract questions like, do you believe in music?
But then in the same vein, question that I would, the podcast is really Jewish.
Yeah.
Like, the question that I might ask is, what's really Jewish about God? But specifically to kind of, what does that question mean? To kind of drill that down, is, can you have a Judaism without God? Is God necessary to tradition? You kind of paint this, overtly academic analysis of where God comes from, where God language comes from, where the analysis of the nature of God might come from, and when in the arc of our tradition. I want to know about what to do today. If I'm very frank, I want to know about how to answer somebody who comes to me and says, I don't believe in God, or can I be Jewish? Or even more acutely, I've lived through the last 2.5 years, or I've lived through the last 10 years of my life, and X and X and X has happened to me. I see the suffering in the world. I see how cruel people can be to one another. I don't believe in God. Can I be Jewish? Is God essential to Jewish life?
Yes, in the sense that he's like the main character in the plot. It's hard. It's not possible to tell these stories without that character. It just isn't possible to tell those stories without. It would be every story that we tell in some way involves the character of God.
So the conversation of last week with Yair, that was a different conversation. We were talking about raising children. Yair is the co-host on Really Jewish. He's devoutly secular in many ways, and although we often align on lots of things, but there was an interesting moment in last week's podcast where I was ultimately saying that I need to make the tradition, we were talking about specifically about egalitarianism, I need to make the tradition make sense for me as an individual. If the tradition doesn't make sense for me as an individual, then I can't live my quite frum, to a degree, devout Jewish life. Whereas he, who devours rabbinic texts and other Jewish texts and reads Psalms regularly, can happily read the text, but his interest is studying them very much from kind of like a bird's eye view, from a removed setting. So the aspect of belief or not belief is neither here nor there from him. So yes, God is the main character. I'm going to have to accept that, because God is the main character of the Exodus from Egypt. God is the main character in the creation story. God is the main character in lots of places in the rabbinic tradition, whether it's inside the Midrash, that God is the Balabai of the burning house, when Abraham comes knocking, the head of the household, when Abraham comes knocking on the flaming palace, or whether it's in, God is the main character in some of the rabbinic tales of the trials and tribulations of the rabbis, Moses in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Akiva, whatever it is, the story is you go to, God is somewhere in there as a main character. I can accept that part. I'm going to need to be involved in Jewish life. But can I appreciate God as a character, or do I need to understand God as something more than a character?
I don't know whether you need to understand God. That's why I
Go on.
originally balked at your opening question. How do you understand God?
Just for the record, pre-agreed opening question that I had written to you.
No, I understand. No, it's fine. No, it's
That's
good.
okay. That's
It's good.
okay.
No, I'm happy for you to ask a question that I don't want to answer. That's fine. No, what I want to say that it's a different skill set or a different experience to say something about God than it is from, say, trying to walk into the presence of God. Those are two very, very different things. I don't spend a lot of time worrying or thinking about what God is, but I do spend a lot of time trying to be in the presence of God, talk to God. So those are two different things. I don't think this podcast is about convincing somebody who doesn't want to do this to do it. Because people aren't very convincible, really. I don't think any the religions that have really done the abstract intellectual analysis of what God is and what we mean by God are Christianity and Islam. I don't think any of those. I've never read any of those proofs for the existence of God and then thought, "Wow, that's it now. And I'm a believer." I don't think intellectual proofs for the existence of God do it for me in any shape or form. They might be necessary in terms of kind of intellectual respectability. It might be that we want to show that we're not completely checking out our brains when we get into the Beit Midrash or in shul, in synagogue or something like that. But the heart of the experience is not proving to people that God exists or that God has a particular nature or the abstract intellectual assent to a set of abstract truths. It's not like maths. That's not the nature of the activity at all. Like, people who want to come to shul are people who want to experiment with being in God's presence. And that can take many forms. It takes forms which are both mimetic and mythic. Like, a lot of the time in synagogue, we do mimetic and mythic things. We do singing together, which is like, wow, it takes me back a million years. Takes me back a million years when I do that. Like, that's a long time. Like, I have a million-year-old experience when I sing together with a community and we all get up close and we're all singing together and we say the same words at the same time and we move together. It literally takes me back a million years. It's great. That's part of what I want in shul. And the other thing we do is myth. We do stories, story time. We all sit together and read a story. And the story is a story about whether one of the main characters is God and our ancestors. So what we do in synagogue is not theoretic. What we do in synagogue is mythic and mythical. It's mythical and mimetic. It's the bits of human civilization that are 1 million years old and 200,000 years old. And we don't spend much time doing theoretical stuff around, tell me about the nature of God, tell me about the nature of physics, and tell me about the nature of metaphysics. God, do we ever do any of that? We never do that. We just don't have that conversation. Now that might be because it's only like 1% of Judaism, or it might be because Judaism just like never got involved so much in that stuff. And you're right, no one says to people, I don't know any Jews who say, before you come to synagogue, I want to work out whether you're a true believer in the thing that we believe in. And it's not the way the system operates. It's like, just jump in. It's in the same way as no one in their right mind would say to a child, I want to take you to expose you to music for the first time, but before you go, I just want to make sure that you believe in music. Like, if you did that, you'd be mad. Because what really needs to happen with children is they have to experience music, and they have to encounter God, and they have to encounter mythic culture and civilization, of which Judaism is a tremendous example. And they have to get it into their veins. And if they do that, then maybe somewhere down the line, we can have a conversation of theory, which is the last layer of human evolution, not the first layer of human evolution. But the reason why your question made me uncomfortable at the beginning was because you started with the question that you ask at the end, not the question you ask at the beginning. So there is a way of thinking about God in theoretical terms, and Christianity did that really well. I think one can learn that stuff. It's not my cup of tea, but I think that there's amazing writings about God theory. And the crisis, I think there is a crisis of religion in the 21st century, The crisis is that we ask a question that comes from the 21st century, and we don't allow the thing to breathe in its own terms. And biblical Judaism, which is pre-literate, and rabbinic Judaism, which is literate but mythic, both of those have a huge amount to offer our lives without even asking the question of theory. What is God? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm just trying to work out where the right question is that you ask at the right time.
No, and I don't take what you say as evasive, but I'm also going to be persistent. Listen, you're one of my foremost teachers because you are a rabbi who is straight shooting, and you're also kind of an interesting balance between, Ba'al Yeshiva, that you've sat in lots of years studying Talmud and other rabbinic texts and beyond, so you are steeped in our tradition in a way that many of my rabbinic colleagues are not, just simply in that way in terms of the sheer number of hours that you've sat in the Beit Midrash, the Jewish Study Center. But you're also somebody who's, has people around your table on Friday night and works for a community. A small community which you visit, not as frequently as perhaps you would like or wouldn't like, but you've got both those parts to you. I'm just thinking of Shimon Bar Yochai exiting the cave where he sat with his son for 12 years studying and fiercely burning up the outside world and all the people that he saw. That could be part of the experience of being somebody who spends a lot of time in yeshiva, that you have no patience or possible understanding for the world outside. But probably you exist in both worlds enough that you understand and have sensitivity to both worlds. Why am I going there? I think because you're right, sure. Naseh v'nishma, like the aspect of Jewish life which asks us to jump in the literal terms from the language of Mount Sinai, asks us to jump, or the rabbinic understanding of those words, asks us to jump into the active execution of the religion, carrying out the religion before we ever seek to understand it. And maybe in the terminology that you're presenting, maybe we never seek to understand it. Maybe part of being Jewish is just to be in that world and to stay in that world. I need to push you, though, on the question, because ultimately we live in very trying times. We live in times of great instability in the Middle East, in and around Israel. I think we live in very uncertain and frail times in the UK and Europe in many respects for Jewish communities and beyond, for those listening to the podcast. And a question you might very well ask at this time is both, where is God when there's war and travesty and catastrophe in the world? And do I believe in that God? So I guess I asked that question, but I'm asking you, in the few minutes that we have left, to say what it means for you as a teacher to, I've struggled with God, I haven't struggled with God, I don't think about struggling with God, which seemed to be the suggestion of where you began with. That doesn't come into your understanding. But if you haven't personally struggled with God, you've certainly come up against with people who have. Yeah. So if you could speak to that question, that would be super.
Yeah. Well, thanks for putting me on the spot. That's cool. And also I like the tension between my bit of my professional life, which is in the yeshiva, and the bit that's like within communal life, because everyone who comes to the yeshiva is already in already. They've already taken the dive. They're like already in. They've taken a deep dive. And most of the people that congregational rabbis work with are not, they're skirting around the outside of something. They're not taking the deep dive. They're not drinking the Kool-Aid, and they're not trying to, they're not saying, well, I want to live this 24/7. They're living it, if you're lucky, like 3-4 hours a week or something like that. And they're very skeptical. And sometimes I definitely feel like now I've been doing that. I've been a la cave. I've been making the journey between the yeshiva and my community for 25 years. Now I know how to not screw it up when I speak to my community, but there were times when I definitely spoke from within the Beit Midrash in my community setting, and it was wrong, and I just messed it up big time, and I felt like I'd just come out of the cave, and it was very. I also feel that now coming out of Israel, obviously, because the discourse in Israel is so different from the discourse in England, and then something, you have to reprogram yourself when you come back into England and think about, how do I talk about this thing? Because I think, not only might I come over as a religious lunatic, I can also come over as a fascist if I, it's just the language, we're living in different linguistic worlds at the moment, and that's crazy. It does your head in a bit in terms of the difference of the world that I'm living in Israel and the world I'm living in England. So that's part of your question, I think. But the depth of your question was well, what do you say to people who like they really do are skeptical. They are skeptical about the basics of the tradition, and what's the language for drawing people into that conversation. And I'm not trying to be evasive. I'll say one thing, and then look. Thank goodness I've managed to drag this out, so I actually don't have to answer your first question properly, which is great. Humans have been not that. There hasn't been a human. One of the archetypal aspects of what it means to be a human being is that we live within worlds of conventional constructed meaning, and that's true from the moment we start to speak, and we can't do it any other way. The things that really matter to us are constructed, and there isn't a human being alive that doesn't live in a constructed world of meaning. Like, once we develop language, we paradoxically create the world that we live in. And that world that we live in, we really live in, the things that we take most seriously are the things that are the most constructed. So like my marriage, for example, like marriage is like, it's just made up. It's totally made up. It's like, it's made up. And I could walk away from it at any moment. And yet it consumes a huge amount of my thought and my energy and my love and my, like, trying to do this well, trying to respect this person properly. It takes a huge amount of energy and effort, but it's a made up thing. Marriage is a made up thing. So that's true with everything that matters, and people are prepared to lay down their life for these made up things, like countries, gods, wives. Like, these things are the things that really matter are the things that are actually not physical, they're metaphysical. The things that actually, that if you're going to lead a life of meaning and purpose as a human being, you can't do it without encountering the metaphysical. And what it means to have a good human life means to lead a life of meaning and purpose. And that's part of the crisis of the 21st century, is that so many people are running around thinking that the way you answer the question of what a good life is the first question you have to ask yourself is, I don't know, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? Who am I and what do I want? As if the answer to that question will it give you a good life? And without inheriting anything, without an inheritance of meaning and purpose. But we have 1,000,000-year inheritance of meaning and purpose. Like, why would you give up on that? That would be nuts. Like, if you think that you can invent yourself and that will give you a life of meaning and purpose, all it will give you is a life of narcissism. Because you won't encounter the thing that transcends you, which you encountered by the bonfire 1,000,000 years ago. You won't encounter the thing which actually does give your life meaning and purpose, which is the transcendent. Like, try to live. I don't think it's possible to. I think there are 1,000 reasons to lead a life of meaning and purpose from an inherited tradition, and there are also dangers inherited in that, obviously. But if you want to be a human being in the fullest sense, then I think being a human being without God is like trying to lead a human life without. I don't know. Can't tell. Shall I ask if Suzanne?
Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up. I don't know whether I leave our conversation more mystified or more connected, but maybe that's part of the story. I have my own perceptions on how we interface and interact with God, and they are, tangibly somewhat different from where you come from. But what I learn is, in a really clear way, is about permitting ourselves to be in that ancient tradition which perceives God, and the image of music like a God-centered life is helpful. And certainly, kind of the last conversation we had last week was about raising children. Like, in that sense, kind of what we give to our children and ultimately what we give to our students is that offering of coming into that world and living that world. And maybe borrowed from the 21st century, we spend too much time trying to explain the nature of God or trying to rationalize God, and not enough time permitting ourselves to be in that space. Rabbi Joe, will definitely have you back, and I really appreciate you coming on board it's our celebratory 10th episode of the Really Jewish podcast, and wishing you guys only good.
Thank you, Rabbi Oliver.
So that was great to talk to Joel. Listen, it's an intimate space because Joel has been a really prolific and important teacher for me. I think, as I presented in the interview with him, he's somebody who both exists in the Beit Midrash, which is the house of study, literally in Jerusalem, where he has taught students, I think, for more than 20 years inside Bet Futzberg, a place that I studied. And I do think, he skirted around the topic a little bit, but I do think this is a crucial question for Judaism. And the question of how we interact with God and God language is really crucial. When we lose people in our lives, when families break down, when we have illness, a lot of people ask questions which are crucial about God. And I totally accept his take on that, which is that Judaism is not about that question of what God is. Judaism is about immersing ourselves in that place where we experience God. Truth is, we experience God everywhere. We can experience God by listening to music, by hearing the sound of birdsong, by seeing a beautiful waterfall. But the project of religious life is about stepping into space, in the Jewish world, stepping into synagogue, stepping into community of more than 10 people, and hearing the music and, as he described, the mimetic words of the Jewish tradition, and through that, experiencing God. Through the stories of God, godliness, the essence of God that we tell ourselves, whether it's the midrashic rabbinic stories or whether it's the simple stories of our tradition of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, of the story of creation, of the story of Exodus, those are the places that somehow we hear the voice of God, or at least try and understand what that God is. So I was struck both by his words and also by his kind of loose evasion of the place that I wanted to go to, which is how do we understand or speak to God in moments of crisis? That's probably a conversation that, we often speak on this podcast about what we're going to learn next, what we're going to talk about next. An upcoming podcast now will be not the question of what is God or who is God or how is God, but how do I speak to God or how do I understand God in moments of crisis? That's definitely been part of my journey as a rabbi and also as a teacher to other people. With that said, I'm going to wrap up here by saying thank you for listening to Really Jewish. We really hope that you are getting something out of being here. We really appreciate your support. I want to thank Sophia, who's our new producer on this podcast, for her support. Thank you to Oy Vavoy for the musical intro and outro to this podcast. You can listen to Back to My Roots, available on streaming platforms, and offer them your support. We are excited to welcome you back next week for a new installment of Really Jewish, Back with Your Ear. And you can help us by sharing clips of this podcast on the social media channels, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram. Also giving us 5 stars where you listen to your podcast and sharing any of this material with friends. Finally, you can support this podcast by supporting us on Patreon with a small monthly financial donation. Thank you so much for listening to Really Jewish and look forward to seeing you next week.